Before we dive in, if you've been following this channel for a while, you already know we don't do hype here. We do research. And if you're new, hit that subscribe button right now because what we're about to break down today is exactly the kind of thing this channel was built for. Now let's get into it. Picture this. It's early morning. Markets are just opening. And quietly, without a single headline breaking on mainstream news, one of the most consequential legal rulings in the history of digital assets just got confirmed. No bells, no confetti, just a court document, a gavel, and a decision that a lot of people in this space have been waiting years to see. That's where we are with XRP right now. And the question I keep hearing in the comments, in the DMs from people who've been sitting on the sidelines is the same question every time. Is it too late? And my honest answer to that is, it depends entirely on what you understand about what just happened. Because if you don't understand the ruling, you can't understand the opportunity. And if you can't understand the opportunity, you'll either panic buy at the wrong moment or hold back when you should be paying attention. So that's what we're doing today. We're slowing down, we're going through this carefully, and we're giving you the full picture. But before anything else, and I say this every single time we touch finance on this channel because it matters, nothing you hear today is financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. I am not your broker, your wealth manager, or your attorney. Everything we discuss here is purely for educational and informational purposes. The crypto market is volatile. It always has been. You can lose money, real money. So please, before you make any decision with your capital, speak to a qualified financial professional who understands your personal situation. What works for one person's portfolio may be completely wrong for another's. We're here to inform, not to instruct. With that said, let's talk about what's really going on. To understand why this verdict matters, you have to go back to where this all started, and that means going back to December of 2020, when the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, filed a lawsuit against Ripple Labs, the company behind XRP. The charge essentially was that Ripple had been selling XRP as an unregistered security. In other words, the SEC was saying that every time XRP changed hands, it was legally speaking the same as selling a stock, and that Ripple had done this for years without following the rules that govern how securities are sold to the public. Now, if you were in this space at that time, you remember what happened next. It was brutal. Major exchanges delisted XRP almost overnight. Coinbase pulled it, Kraken pulled it, investors watched the price absolutely crater. And for a lot of people, that was the end of the XRP story. They sold. They moved on. They assumed the SEC was going to win, that Ripple was going to be found guilty of violating securities law, and that XRP was going to be regulated into irrelevance. But here's the thing about assumptions in this space. They will burn you every single time. Because what actually happened in that courtroom over the years that followed was something far more nuanced than anyone expected. Ripple fought back hard. And when Judge Annalisa Torres issued her landmark ruling in July of 2023, it sent shockwaves through the industry. Her decision drew a distinction, a legally meaningful, precedent-setting distinction, between XRP sold to institutional investors and XRP sold to retail investors on public exchanges. She found that programmatic sales of XRP to retail buyers on secondary markets did not constitute investment contracts under the Howey test. In plain English, when regular people bought XRP on an exchange, they were not buying a security. That was a massive win for Ripple. And it was a massive moment for the broader crypto industry, because for the first time, a federal judge had said clearly, not everything that looks like crypto is a security. Context matters, how it's sold matters, who it's sold to matters. But the legal battle wasn't fully over after that ruling. There were still questions about remedies, about what Ripple owed for the institutional sales that were found to have violated securities law, and about whether the SEC would appeal. And so the uncertainty lingered, prices moved, narratives shifted, and a lot of people were still waiting, which is exactly what brings us to now. The confirmation that's come through recently represents something bigger than just the end of a legal case. It represents the beginning of regulatory clarity, and in crypto, regulatory clarity is one of the most underpriced assets that exists. Let me explain what I mean by that. For the better part of the last decade, one of the single biggest obstacles to institutional money entering the crypto space has been legal ambiguity. Large asset managers, pension funds, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, these are organizations that move with lawyers and compliance departments and risk committees. They don't move into assets that don't have clear legal definitions. They can't. Their fiduciary duties won't allow it. So when you have an asset like XRP, which has been used by banks, by financial institutions, by payment companies in over 100 countries, sitting under a cloud of legal uncertainty that keeps an enormous amount of potential capital on the sideline. Not because institutional players don't understand the technology, not because they don't see the use case, but because the legal picture wasn't clean enough for them to justify the position. A resolved verdict changes that calculus. It doesn't guarantee anything. Markets are unpredictable, and there are still macro factors, still broader crypto market conditions, still 1,000 variables that determine where price goes. But it removes a specific concrete obstacle that has been in place for years. And removing obstacles, especially legal ones, is how institutional appetite gets unlocked. That's what smart money watches, not the hype, not the Twitter threads, not the YouTube thumbnails. Smart money watches for legal clarity, for regulatory frameworks, for the conditions that allow them to actually deploy capital at scale. And those conditions just got measurably better. Now, here's where I want to be very deliberate with you because this is where a lot of people make mistakes. A positive legal development is not the same as a guaranteed price increase. I want to be crystal clear about that. Markets price in information constantly. Some of this outcome was already anticipated, already factored into the price to some degree. The question is never just, is the news good? The question is the news better than what was already expected? And that's a much more complex calculation. What we know for certain is that XRP's fundamental use case and cross-border payments, liquidity bridging, banking infrastructure hasn't changed. If anything, it's stronger now. Ripple has continued to build partnerships, expand into new markets, and develop its on-demand liquidity product. The technology didn't stop advancing while the lawyers were arguing. The network kept growing. The corridors of value transfer that Ripple operates in kept expanding. And now, that underlying business gets to operate without the single most destructive cloud that was hanging over it. That matters. Long term, that matters enormously. Whether it translates into a price move in the next week or the next month, that's genuinely unknowable, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. But whether the legal resolution improves the structural investment case for XRP over a longer time horizon, I think that's a much easier argument to make. Let's also talk about the broader environment for a moment, because you can't evaluate any single asset in isolation. The crypto market doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a global financial system that is currently going through a very interesting moment. Interest rate policy is shifting. Institutional adoption of digital assets has been accelerating, particularly with the approval and success of spot Bitcoin ETFs. There is growing bipartisan interest in the United States in establishing a proper regulatory framework for the crypto industry. And the general sentiment, both among retail investors and institutional allocators, has shifted from deep skepticism to cautious optimism over the past year and a half. XRP now exists inside that broader environment without its biggest legal liability. It enters this market moment with something that most other tokens don't have: a resolved legal identity. It knows what it is, legally speaking. And in a market where regulatory risk is still one of the primary concerns investors raise when they're evaluating digital assets, that distinction is actually meaningful. It doesn't mean XRP is the right investment for everyone. It doesn't mean it can't fall significantly from current levels. Risk is always present. Volatility is always present. And correlation with the broader crypto market means that if Bitcoin has a major correction, XRP is going to feel it regardless of its legal status. These are real considerations that you need to weigh. But if you're building a framework for how to think about this asset, if you're trying to understand what changed and why it matters, the resolved legal picture is the single most important development that has happened in XRP's history. Full stop. I also want to address something I see in the comments a lot when we talk about XRP. There's a very vocal group of long-term XRP holders, people who have been in this since 2017, 2018, who have genuinely been through hell with this asset. They watched it hit almost $4 in late 2017. They watched it crash. They held through years of depression-level pricing. They held through the SEC lawsuit. They held through delistings and doubt and an overwhelming narrative that XRP was finished. And if you're one of those people, I want to acknowledge that. The conviction it takes to hold through that kind of drawdown, through that kind of legal uncertainty, through that kind of public narrative against your position, that is not a small thing. A lot of people gave up. You didn't. And whether this moment ends up validating that patience or not, I want you to know that your experience is seen. For those of you who are newer to this and who are coming to XRP now post-verdict, trying to understand if there's still an opportunity, the advice is the same advice that applies to every asset in this space. Do your own research, understand what you own, understand the risks, size your position appropriately for your own financial situation. Don't put in more than you can afford to lose, and don't make decisions based on emotion, whether that emotion is excitement or fear. The crypto market will always have another opportunity. The most dangerous thing you can do is let urgency override judgment, because the people who blow up their accounts in this space almost never do it by missing a trade. They do it by forcing a trade, by buying too much too fast because they're afraid of being left behind, by ignoring risk management because the news cycle made them feel like they had to act right now. Take a breath, do the research, make a plan, and then execute with discipline. Here's where I'll leave you. The XRP verdict is confirmed. The legal cloud that has defined this asset for over 4 years is clearing. The fundamental use case remains intact and in many ways has only grown stronger during the litigation. The broader crypto market is in a more favorable regulatory environment than it's been in years, and institutional appetite for properly regulated digital assets continues to grow. That is the picture. That is what changed, and that is why it matters. Whether that translates into a price move tomorrow, next month, or over the next 2 years, I genuinely don't know. Nobody does. And anyone who tells you with certainty what XRP is going to do next is either lying to you or lying to themselves. What we can do is understand the fundamentals, understand the context, make thoughtful decisions, and manage our risk like adults. That's what this channel has always been about. Not hype, not guaranteed moonshots, not clickbait promises, just clear thinking about complex topics. Because this space rewards the patient, the informed, and the disciplined, and punishes the impatient, the uninformed, and the emotional. If this video gave you something valuable today, a new way to think about the XRP verdict, a clearer picture of what's happening in the market, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because good information in this space is genuinely hard to find, and if you found it here, someone else might need it too. This has been Journey to Crypto. Stay curious, stay careful, and I'll see you in the next one.